today we're going to cover some material that we've already done, talking about the solo bindings. And like I said, I've been editing the replays. So when you go watch the video, there's all kinds of experiments and trials and failed attempts are gone. They're not in that. So all that stuff that you've waited so patiently through on Monday, for instance, none of that's in there. It just gets right to the meat of the webinars, and you just see that. So it's a lot easier to watch and take notes. Now I'm trying to encourage people who watch this video to, oh, well, he's basically just told us to just watch the video, not bother going to the webinar. But at least in the webinars, as you see, you get to participate and ask questions directly right there and say, hey, let's try this, and make suggestions and help me out when I don't know something. So we're going to go through more use cases, and I'm going to jump back into the back end and just look through some of those ones that are only available manually for the people that didn't watch Mondays, because they might have thought that that was just for solo. Okay, the first thing I wanted to cover was all the create bindings, things that are right there on the front page. So let me go ahead and share the screen. All right, well, so we're going to go over the ones that are right there on the front page that are easy bindings to create. Right now this song doesn't have any bindings in it, so we're going to create a whole bunch that are song level bindings. So we'll just start right off left to right, and you can right click on the record button and create a binding, and it says record start stop or auto record on and off. So when you click on that, you're given the choice, and then you move, or you hit your button that you're going to do, and it learns it. So let's say we're going to do that one. And since I'm sending this controller in two methods, just as the keyboard and as the controllers only, I can select which one I want to use and then hit it, and now that button's going to turn record on and off. Okay. Well, all right, so there's the record button. So I didn't add it, but I could have. Same thing with the transport. You click on that and you get to play, and you get play pause as an alternate, and you just hit your button. By the way, I've got my button set to momentary for use in here, and it recognizes that when I hit it, it recognizes.
You mean on the MPK?
On the MPK 249,
you
yeah.
Set them.
So
okay.
Here you. So yeah. Did I just hit? What did I just hit? Okay. So same thing with pause. Now I could be using the controller, the actual controller buttons, like there's 118, and use that for pause, etc., etc. And we're creating it in either the background rack or in Performer. So of course this is very handy. If you're going to go through and do things like the transport and record buttons, you're probably going to want to throw those in your background rack, right? It just makes sense, because you're going to want these all the time if you're always using that. So anyway, yeah, I've added a few bindings, and you'll notice that it noted that that was transport, and so to make it a no edge button. And it makes that momentary, it made a no edge button for play. So this was one of those, this was S1, number 28, and this one was the actual stop button that's on my controller. It was 117. So it was smart about that. We knew that it should be like that. But again, those really belong in the background rack, ideally. Okay, let's get out of that for a second. So we've covered that. Now you can create a binding for this, the flash, the tap tempo, and create a binding that turns tap tempo on and off. You can create a binding for viewing the metronome, for the metronome to be on and off. And that just turns this, makes this appear and disappear. So you can make a binding on your keyboard to save that real estate. You could possibly throw it in that this happens on load. That's one of the things we have in there is when you load a song, whether it's going to show or hide certain things. So if you're not going to need to see certain things, you can have a binding that makes it disappear. The performer space, the live mode, you can show it or hide it. So these guys, very handy. You can change the meter, the time signature preset, and select that from here, but you can also, from clicking that, you can select a whole bunch of different things from here. You can go to next time signature preset, previous time. You can select one based on scaled, and as we discussed Monday, scaled seems to be when you're using a rotary knob that has values from 1 to 127, but you only want 10 choices for the entire range of that knob. And so it scales it out so that you have almost like détentes, different positions make the changes. And so you have that. You can change the preset. This again is a binding to select the presets, and you can do again scaled, next, and previous. Here we go. And that's presets, mind you. You have a binding for decreasing and increasing tempo. So I did the decrease and then create a different binding for increase. And so that's a neat little thing when, you know, when the drummer keeps speeding up and isn't listening to your clicks, and you hit it. Hit that button, it increases. You have this one, that's the tempo itself. So this would be connected to a slider and can move that slider up and down to change your tempo with a slider. You have the button whether to make the metronome audible or not. Okay. These are all super handy. You have a binding to set the volume of the output coming into your headphones. So if you're blasting yourself out, you can turn it down. Now this one, the binding is grayed out, but I know that there is a setting for this in the back. It might be that you've got to say, let each song do the, nope, it's not. So I'm not sure why that's grayed out, because I remember seeing it on Monday when we were inside here. But there you go. Then you have these, create a binding that changes to the next song. I already have one in my background rack to let you delete them. So I have on the pedal board a change that adds. So again, you can create the binding, load song by program, delayed, index, next song, previous song. Same thing in the states, added a couple states. You can create a binding in states that lets you go to next state, previous state, load state by program, and load state by index. So the load state by index just means that you can make a button go to the position in here. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can make the button send based on that. And by program is by using a program message. And it would be program 0, program 1, program 2. Yes, indeedy. There's nothing down in here that's affected by bindings from right clicks. But there are things that you can do with the states behaviors of a song from inside the bindings. Okay. Okay, so now we get into the ports themselves. You can do a lot, again, from inside the back end, but I didn't see a create bindings thing for those. But you do see some, when you get into the back end, you see some things that affect the filters and stuff like that. So we'll dig into that as we get there. On the output ports, you get into the bindings by actually opening the interface. Let's get this out of here. You can create a binding for next preset, selecting preset by index, by a scale, again for a rotary knob that you scale, so it just has so many choices. Next, previous are options there that you can do from right-clicking on there. You can right-click on here. Oh, that's right, these are filters. There's no right-click option, but when you get inside, there's things that you can do. And there is a learn mode. So the learn mode comes in handy, and it creates, I believe it creates a binding type of a scenario. Create a binding for your volume level, the gain. Drink a little drink of water. Oops. This one also has a binding. I have a binding connected to the controller 7 on these two channels. We just create a binding, takes you to that where you can change the master gain, the master levels output. This one up here also has a master levels input gain, so that you can control how much is coming into the system. If you have everything suddenly overloading, everything's going into the red in the meters, you can turn things down a bit. Okie dokie. You have the absinthe wet dry. Now this is most useful for effects. So if I had an effect on here, then I can control its wet dry without having to go inside the effect. So this makes it possible to always leave your effects on full wet and create a mix, a wet dry mix, right from the front panel. Create the binding there to create the pan change. And on this little guy is for the fade. And fade is, I believe that's front and rear, isn't it? Fades audio signal from front to back, yes. Okay? You need to set up your audio channels so that you have a back, of course. If you don't have a back, then it really just acts as a volume control. Alright, so that's from the front here. Let's go inside of a rack. And once you're inside a rack, there are certain bindings that you get. Again, you can create a binding, and it's going to be inside the rack. So these are rack level bindings that travel with the rack and are saved with the rack. So that's a really nice thing, because all the bindings that I was making previously are song-based bindings. The nice thing about song-based bindings is that when I go in and I make a duplicate of the song, I say create copy, and we'll just be prophetic and say this is going to be number 11. When I go into that, there we go. My bindings should be intact that were in the other. So that's useful if you're mostly doing that kind of a thing, creating copy in order to move through in a set list. And of course now you load this song in, and you can create copies from it and then delete it if you're not going to use that song, or you don't want to be making changes to that song, but you just want to use it as a template. But that's one way to get its bindings along into another song and have that as a basis. There's a lot of situations where that's the way to go, because background rack, there's a lot of things it can't do, so you can't really put those types of bindings into a background rack. But if you're doing bindings that involve specific instruments, like I created these for Massive, then you're able to just copy the song and bring those bindings back in, because you're going to, you're basically using the song as a template for this instrument setup, these instruments. And so you're always going to be creating your next show based on the instruments that are your go-tos, for instance. And you're just going to change the patches. All right, so that's a great way to make them transportable. But like I said, the other way to make them transportable is throwing them into racks. And so I can make some bindings on this one and create a binding for select next preset. So there you go. So now in the bindings, I've got this no edge button that hits next preset. And to watch it work, let's see if it works. It works. Okay, so you do not have bindings that connect you to these various ports. And I really should show, there's some stuff about these ports that we didn't go over that I do want to go over. How you can add audio ports. You can add audio ports to a rack and stuff like that that become really useful down the road, and they're bindable also, but from the inside of the unit. And this is an embedded rack. So I've got this processing rack that's a linked rack. Then I've got inside of it a embedded rack. And this is how you can get racks inside of racks. And again, you can create a binding, and it's going to put it into this as a select state by index, next state, previous state. Because these are states in this case. When you're talking about a rack, you're in the world of states. So I have different states that are selectors for the reverb that I'm going to use. I just use this reverbs rack as a quick way rather than, so I can try out different reverbs and delay effects to see which one I really want to use in a specific song. When I select on the left, it disables all the others and enables the one that I want to use. And so the routing goes to it. So that's why right-clicking on that, I was creating a binding to states. Okay? And that will live inside this embedded rack as its binding. Let's see, what else? All right, so now we've covered the basics, racks, the various things that are on the page, your levels, these guys over here, and then we have the, as we discovered, we have the changes that you get when you're actually inside the interface of a plugin. And that's where you can find out what's going to be available by clicking on this little icon up here, and it'll show you the types of things that are going to be available. In this case, I've only got bypass in the case of this, okay, which is not surprising. Let's get out of, let's see what Frontier affords us. And these are the changes it exposes. So these will be available as parameters that I can select. And the way I would select them, like say threshold is, I would move it a little bit, go up and go to create parameter binding, move, select, and there I got threshold. And so now that will live in here for Frontier. Okay? So I've got these two that I've created inside my processing rack. I'm going to take them out because these will get saved with that rack, and I don't necessarily need them. Let's get out, getting into mass. Well, let's yeah. So let's go to Absinthe first. Here are its exposed items. Quite a few. These are the ones that you'd be able to make changes to. And that's kind of handy, by the way. Podolsky exposes just about everything it's got inside of it as something that a binding can be created to. But of course, the way they've got it set up is you simply want to change the drive, you move that, create a parameter binding, and then you move your slider. and so it knows that that drive is the one you wanted, which is quite brilliant. That the learn works so well. Okay. Oh, and finally, massive, as we discovered, only exposes these at the top, these macros. And so when you go in here, you see that these are the first macros that are already assigned, and then you've got the other unassigned macros are the parameters that you change, and then you do the assignments from inside the plugin itself and save it as a preset. And those assignments get saved with the preset. Alrighty. So, are we ready to dive into the inner depths and get into the back end?
Ready.
You ready? You sure?
Yeah.
Because this is where it can get a little scary. This is where we tread into realms unknown. We don't know what's happening. But we'll go ahead and try. I think the part that we just covered right there is going to be 99.999% of what most people are going to find really handy. You agree? But now when we get into the bindings themselves and we start adding binding and learning. So you've got all these inputs. When you click on add binding, you've got all of your input sources up here. You also have synths that can act as input sources if they're exposing. They may be exposing certain things that let them control other things, like perhaps it's modulations or it's LFOs. It may expose various things. You can get your output ports from the MIDI of all of your controllers. So don't let this overwhelm you. I just have too many controllers in the house, but that's what happens when you do all these live shows. You can use your keyboard, your PC keyboard, as an input source. I found plugin by index name is interesting, because rather than choosing the plugin from in here or here, Podolsky or Absinthe, you can select it by index, which means the position in the list here. So this would be index 1, index 2, index 3, and this is index 4, object index 4. So if you're going by objects, these would be the indexes 1, 2, 3, and 4. Here's my processing rack. By set list output, these are curious things to be inputs. So you can have a set list, and this is going to be most likely something where you can use it. Set list, and the index is going to make something happen. Okay, where it sends some kind of some setting that you find useful. So you have selected song, index, scaled, the program, so it's which program number it is. By name is curious. I'm not sure, but I guess it just means state 1, state 2. It's going to go by that. But, all right, so let me get out of the wandering around. In the dark mode, the recorder states whether it's start, stop, or auto record. These are apparently when the state has changed, then it sends something to a target. So it might execute a command, or it might do something with the engine. It might force it to restart. Who knows? Send a navigation. As we were going through these on Monday, we found that there's just so many different types of outputs that are available. Okay, let's get back to our inputs. Now, the easiest way that most people are going to use this, of course, is that front page. But you can also use the learn. If you don't want to look up what number MIDI controller you're going to use as the source on a controller, then again, you simply move the controller and see what that was. So here I'll move my mod wheel. And I'm going to create the binding and I've learned from everything in here, and I do my selection, and now I've just got a raw mod wheel input, controller 1, and again I select a target for where it's going to go. Now if you're dealing with the synths, of course we already discovered the easiest way to do this is from inside the synths interface and use the parameter binding option. Up here, create parameter binding, Alt plus B. And that's always going to be the easiest way. So again, just move the thing and make your selection of what you're going to change. Okay. However, there's so many things that I can make the mod wheel change that it's not even funny. I could have it reset my engine, restart the engine, and I could have it turn all sounds off. I could make it reset all. What a great use for a mod wheel, huh? Every time you go to use your mod wheel, you punish yourself by turning the sounds off. It's a way to cure yourself from using the mod wheel too much. Okay, so maybe you wouldn't do that. However, you might use it for master levels or for a level of a particular item, like the output port on one of these. No, not output port, like the MIDI, the level of one of these. Let's see, which one am I trying to think of? Not master levels, but, oh, object. And you select your object, song, and the object that you want to do, say would be number 1, or you could select it by that. Hit OK, and now I can control my gain using my mod wheel. So that's really handy. I could have done the same thing again simply by right-clicking here, create binding, move my mod wheel, and have it go to gain. Okay, so that would have been an easier method. Now a lot of people that do a lot of string or an orchestral type playing use the mod wheel as a volume control so that they can articulate especially their strings and, well, horns too, and they can change the volumes as they're playing and do the dynamics that way. So I could see mod wheel becoming a very popular thing, but this would be the manual way of doing it, and what we just looked at would be the arduous and long-winded way of doing it. However, it's informative because it shows you all the different things that you could change. Now that you've gone in here, you can get to fade and speed and next preset and all those, pretty much most of the things that we found you could create a binding just by right-clicking. Now one thing we didn't see, and I'm wondering if we can, is set color on off. Now my binding, I can set this to go to color and have my mod wheel turn the color on and off. There you go, cycle through my colors. Now, this is great when you're doing webinars because you can set this up and have light shows as part of your webinar for Cantabile. And it keeps a lot more entertaining when people start falling asleep. You just kind of time it when you start throwing this stuff in, like I did, right? It was all methodical. I thought that one through. So, okay, but there you go. You can change the color. We also found that there are buttons. If you use a button, you can make the color appear or disappear because there's numbers on these buttons, and you can scale the button and make it assign a color, for instance. But I like the mod wheel best now. That's my solution. Okay. Play, pause, presets, fades, all that kind of good stuff. And that's just in, even though I was hitting this object, that's all the things available from that object that I could do with a mod wheel. If I'm doing it as objects. Now mind you, this is just object Podolsky. Objects are simply this, its position in the list. And so these are the things that we could also create bindings by right-clicking all of these things across. Okay? Let's look at another type of a thing. But I find the object is super useful, by the way. Being able to hit it by stuff that's in a certain sequence in here and have 1, 2, it means that I can move stuff around and have objects change. So if I select objects as numbers, just object 1, object 2, and not by names, then it's do it by object 1. And now, based on what's in the top position, I'm going to have either massive doing that, moves us back to the bottom, and now I have Podolsky doing that. So whatever's in position 1 gets affected by your thing. So that's super handy because you're not always going to use the same templates. And this way you can have your assignments that you know that these sliders affect these volumes in this order that you've positioned them in inside of your song. So you create this song and now you can move stuff around in the order that you want on the fly, custom. Okay? Now that means this one's has 3 synths in it, but I've got 8 sliders. So I can go ahead and create my assignments and the bindings to the objects. And as I create copies of this song and add more things to it, my sliders just simply work on the subsequent objects because they're just assignments to objects. So you needn't actually have the objects there to go ahead and make the bindings that are going to work on those objects later as you start adding them. Okay? I find that very, very useful. As I'm doing the orchestral things, I find that I just really only use a few of the sliders, but this allows me to just click it right into place just by moving an object around as to which objects those sliders work on. So I love that. There you go. All right, let's do some more playing around. So we covered object. And remember, the difference is that we made song as the target. The rack is the song. This we had to noodle through on Monday. Thank you, Gabriel, for figuring that out. I think it was you. Or you can select the racks that are in the system and work on those objects inside that rack. But then and again, these are objects. Mind you, this is a named rack, but I can also target racks by number, by object. So my racks follow the same rule. Whichever is the topmost rack is going to be affected by this binding. And this next one in the line will be affected by that binding. So that's a good reason not to go by the names. Okay. So and then in song, meaning I'm just selecting the objects that are in the song. Again, rather than selecting these by name, which makes it pretty much stuck. Well, the thing is, the nice thing about this is if you always know a certain slider is always going to be for Podolsky, then and you know you're going to move Podolsky to different positions, but you always want that slider to affect its filter, for instance, then perhaps that's a solution, just using object by name. Okay. Let's take a look at some other things. And then you have your output ports are going out to your actual output ports that are your controllers. If you have controllers that can receive. But yes, I do have some of these receive input. VFC receives input that lets me use, I can move one of my motorized sliders if I selected this. I could tell it which one of these I'm going to move. So channel 1's 7. That will move with my mod wheel. That moves my first channel 1 first slider on my BFC 2000 motorized mixer, motorized sliders. Okay, let's see. Also my these are things that can be done with filters or just by assigning specific, use a filter so that you're just sending a controller and send that controller to multiple different outputs using the filters and copies. But so say I wanted to send a mod wheel from my one controller out to my wave station, for instance, and now I can get that going to the wave station, acting as if it's the wave station.
If you have a controller that, like, the encoder can show how many positions you're at, you're on number 3 or 8 or whatever, is this how you would send back out to it so that it knows that you
Yes, yeah, like the
turned
lights.
up?
Yeah, the lights on a
Right.
knob.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Does the BCF 2000 have that? The
Yep,
little
for the
light?
knobs. The knobs
Right.
have
How about
those.
the MPK? Does that do that?
No, it doesn't have any.
Right.
It doesn't work with any inputs.
Right.
This would send it to the processing rack. Whatever my changes are, send it into the processing rack and change things inside of there. If I've got states in the processing rack, I could change its gain for the whole rack using that controller. And I can change the color of the rack, of course. Interesting to see the solo exclusive, and solo controls in this rack. I didn't expect that. I didn't know we had solo capability in Cantabile. Did you?
But there is a solo button,
There is?
but it depends where. It's for Rex, there is a solo button on the
Yeah, there it is.
to the right.
Where's the
One
solo
more.
button?
S.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right to
Oh,
the left of the name, right?
oh, there it is. By golly, I've
Yeah.
never soloed. That's always been just sort of disappeared into the blue for my eyes. Well, by golly, we don't have solo, and I didn't even know it.
What's the difference between solo and solo exclusive?
I think solo exclusive
leaves
means
back,
you can't shift hold.
Exclusive, sorry. Yes.
Let's see if I can turn on more than one. Yeah, if I hold control, I can make others come on.
Ah, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I can solo more than one. That
I
might
was
be.
annoyed by this, the fact that I could solo just one at a time, but now it seems it
Yeah,
works.
yeah.
Really?
Apparently,
Yeah.
so when you just click it by itself, that would be solo exclusive. So it turns everything else off. Hold down control and it lets you do solo selected. So that's what's going on in there. Is you have the solo exclusive is our typical click the solo button method.
And then
But
solo control.
solo would let you turn that on and off. Solo control might just toggle. Let's see. Yeah, it's a toggle. Or
Okay.
toggle on or off.
Okay.
So let's watch that in place.
Too many possibilities.
Let's see. Oh, this is a process. This is a rack. So. Oh! Look, no! It's the button's not there now. Now the button's there. So when I'm in one position, it disappears. It's not even available. And I put it back, and little S appears. There's the answer to your question. Solo control makes it whether you have the control over that as a solo or not at all. Which means I would guess that that means it can't be canceled out. So if you turn it off, it means the other solos aren't going to affect that one. Does that make sense? Just as a guess. Let's see.
Yeah. So you can just make it so it can't be soloed.
Yeah. It just disappeared. And so now that can't
So
be
we
soloed,
keep
I
playing.
imagine.
Hey, was the default that the rack doesn't have solo? I think that was the case, right?
Yeah, you can hear, right?
Yep.
Well, that means
No,
that
I
this
can't.
processing rack didn't
No,
get soloed. This is important, actually, what we just stumbled upon. No matter what, I'll always need to have my processing rack work in order to hear something, because all of my audio routes to that in order to get out to headphones or speakers. So if I solo something, it may be working, but I don't hear anything because it turned this one off. Okay, I would have to do
We hear you.
that control click to turn it back on again. However, if I toggle it off so that it's not even available,
Now I see. Okay, okay,
now
okay.
I can solo,
If you have,
and that's
okay.
not affected. So I can solo stuff. And
If you have more than one item which is soloed and you bind to solo, then you are adding another soloed rack or
item.
scene item. Okay.
Yeah,
but if you select
control clicking.
Okay, well, if you select solo exclusive, when you press your button, all the other solos are deactivated.
Deactivated, yeah.
Exactly. That's how it works.
And then the third one, being the solo control, turns off
the possibility.
Turns off the possibility to solo
okay.
it.
Yeah.
So it can't be made to disappear, which is essential in this case. And there's probably a click that makes that also, but I haven't found it. It's got to be though.
If you right click on the name of the rack, you should be able to activate the button or not. If you right click on the processing rack.
Yes.
You right click and you can toggle the switch solo control. You see more or less in the middle.
Oh. No, I don't see it. There,
higher.
I see. Solo control. Got it. So that's how you get rid of it. Okay, good. So you don't have to use a binding to do that. I was starting to wonder, how do I do this by itself? That's very interesting. Very, very valuable. Okay, so that's how I get it out of the system, out of the loop, so it's never part. So this is another great reason to have these templates that you use, that you just make copies of template songs. So that you can always have your processing rack with solo control turned off. But of course, since I didn't even know the solo button was there before, this never bit me before. Yeah, so I see when you do have solo, you can create a binding right there. It's the one that I missed, and turn it on and off, as you can create a binding for this, for resume, suspend, and bypass. You can create a binding for bypass. Okay.
Have you found any use for the bypass option?
No.
Or you don't use it?
I never found a use for it. I'm not sure
what is the difference between deactivating the synth or
bypassing? Exactly. That's what I don't know.
Okay.
Also, I wish that, let's create a binding. I'll use that. Resume, suspend, and just to look at the binding that we just created. So here's a resume, suspend toggle. Do I have on load? And I don't see on load in this list, because I would love to be able to on load stuff rather than bypass or resume suspend, because it pulls them out of the CPU load entirely. And sometimes that's really essential to get them out of there.
If you suspend, you're using RAM, but maybe not CPU.
No, it's in memory. It's just maybe not being CPU, using CPU. And you see in use cases like in my processing rack with that reverbs rack, there's no way I want to leave any of these just bypassed because they're loading into memory. The whole idea of performance is to be able to have it snap right in when you enable it, right? So it's loaded into memory waiting. So that's why in these states, I've got to have it deactivate. So on load is definitely what I need in this case, but I don't think that many people are using it as a plug-in selector the way I'm using it. I'm kind of trying to create this rack that creates this super lean thing that is only using memory and CPU of the one that's selected. And then I go in and make my changes by going inside the rack and make any changes or adding presets. But that's an oddball use case most likely. Okay, so let's get back into here again. As we found, navigation lets you assign a button to a keyboard, a computer keyboard output. And that's pretty good group of things. You can do arrow keys, you can do page up, page down. That's amazing. Home and end. And control up, control plus down. That's very fascinating. Set list, things that you can change. You see many of these when you're right-clicking on the set list over here and right-click on it, create a binding. But look at these extras that you get in the manual mode. So let's go ahead and see how that would work. Let me take these out. I'm going to make one by using the right click in set list and create a binding. Second to last button. And so you have a partial list here. The next song, previous, index, and program. So we'll do next. Now let's look at the binding. And you have the full list when you get over here. So even though I created the binding, and this is kind of a lesson for people that strictly were following the beginning of this webinar and creating all their bindings by right-clicking on the page, when you actually go into the back end and look at your bindings, you'll see that sometimes there's a lot more options presented to you than were presented in the list that was in that dialog. So you can, for instance, select first song, delayed or instant, select last song, delayed or instant, instead of the 4 options that it was presenting. See what I'm saying? That's pretty darn useful. We just got next song, and the only option it gave us was next song, previous song. Both used the delayed option versus the instant. Do you remember what delayed versus instant means? I think it has something to do with notes off.
Oh, it lets the notes.
I think when all the notes are off, then it sends the next song. When you finally got your fingers off of the keyboard. Okay? That's delayed. Instant means it's as soon as you hit that controller, it makes the change. However, Cantabile is kind and sustains any notes that you had going from the, if you're still holding notes down, it still sounds them, even though it's changing. And it does that for states too. So first song, last song, next song or part. Next song or part. All right, I'm lost. What's part? Anyone?
The song part, right? That's.
Huh?
I think
Like
I've played with those.
It's like states? What do you mean, song part?
I have played with that. It was you know, song part one, part two, part three, and each part could have you know, different settings. I think if
Oh,
you
by parts, do you meaning states, or is there something called parts?
yeah, yeah, doesn't it go back to
Part one
states?
and
I think it
two.
does.
Yeah, it calls this part one and two. I must
Look,
later to
song
states.
parts. I guess they used to be called parts.
Ah, AKA song parts. Got it. So I can go to next song or part delayed, and then so that means if I'm not on the last part, I take it,
Exactly.
then
Yeah.
it's going to go to the next one. Well,
So it cycles through all the states and then to the next song.
state two, sure enough. That's what it did. And then once I'm done with the states, it goes to the next song. Well, isn't that cool?
That's useful.
That's super useful. Just have one button
Pretty much how
that
you want it.
that moves you dot 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 through your show, and then the next hit goes to the next song. I'm happy.
If you're going to do an extended jam on the last part, you
You
go
just
back
leave.
to it.
Yeah, exactly. And you can do previous song or part too. So if you're at the beginning of a song, I guess that'll take you to the next previous. I don't know if it's going to be so fancy. It takes you to the last part of the previous
But
song.
it does.
Oh yeah. Well,
Yeah, that's
a
what
little
that's
afraid
what
to
I was saying.
try. Let's see. Okay, we'll go here. And that, though, of course, that I don't have that binding in there now. Let me copy and paste. And copy. There we go, and paste that in there. That's another thing I guess it's important to show. You can do this between songs just by copy and paste, load the next song. And that's one way to move things around. Alright, so I'm going to select previous song or part. Delayed. I take it. And have that be, I have to learn the button. 1 sec. 41. Okay. So that's going to be my previous. So let's see what it does. Yeah, save that. Okay, so we're in the states. State 1 takes me to state 2, takes me to 11, and oh, and I didn't have any states in this one. Well, let's just see if it takes us back to, okay, it takes me back to 10, and I'm still in state 2. But it might be because I just left state 2 too. Okay, well that's all fun stuff to experiment with. Very neat. So we have next song, previous or part. That is so useful. That should be in the default list, in my opinion. And finally, the load song with index lets you put in some numbers, I take it, of which song you're going to load in. So you can create set lists and decide which one of these songs you're going to load in. And isn't it nice? It gives you the list, the songs that you've got loaded already showing there, so you just pick it from a list. Very handy. And this one, load with program. I guess it's just sending program messages instead. Would you say? I noticed that program index gives you more choices because there's unused indexes that, whereas the program just shows the ones that exist. Okay. Anything else that's exciting in here? And scaled would be, again, if you're using a knob and you want to scale the output and turn this down so that you've only got 10 choices. And then the knob would be able to move you through there. All right, so that's set list. Pretty exciting. song itself is the entire song, so it's your output and input gain. You can change the transposition of the song right there from a knob or slider. That's really neat, really neat. You can have, now learn transpose. What's, oh, that's, you hit a key and it transposes it to that key. So it's probably based on middle C. Transpose up, transpose down buttons, transpose octave up and down, and octave up snapped. What do you say that means? See, some of these things, I've never noticed them in the guide. Snapped. Well, there you go, webinar watchers. You have another thing to try out and see or look up in the guide. Another reason to go to the guide. Okay, let's see what regular octave up. It doesn't offer any settings. And that's the fun part about watching these webinars, is we're learning this stuff too. It's so deep, and even if I had all the answers, knowing all of the applications of these things would be impossible. So this definitely, the webinar is also an invitation for people to get to know all this stuff, dive in and experiment. All right, so finally we have states with all the different state changes that you can do. First state, last state, reset state, all kinds of stuff. And transport controls, triggers, which is a whole other realm. Trigger events, specific and indexed. It's a whole other realm. And then viewing is the different modes of views that you get. Show notes, live mode, toolbar, all that kind of stuff. The recordings tab, if it's not showing. So you can, these are things you can control from a controller if you so chose to do. Or you could have a tablet with Touch OSC loaded in and create a whole bunch of controller messages from that thing that bring up these things for you during a show. So I can find that even more useful than having them on my hardware controller, to have it on a tablet that has multiple pages, and I bring up the page that I need for views, and ding, 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 just hit a button that I've created on my tablet and bring up these things. And of course there's the buttons that you can see in Cantabile too. I just don't have showing. Okay, now there's a few other things that have to do with the media player and stuff like that. I won't have time to go into. It's pretty deep. We don't have one in place now, no media player. But if I did, I would have controls over all these things here. In markers, fast forward speeds, musical rewind, musical fast forward. I guess that's by tempo beats, following your metronome. A real time based on clock only. Soloing. And color.
Sometimes, it's like you look at these things, you just have no idea what they are.
Yeah.
And like when you start getting you can narrow it down if you've gotten input from someone else on what most of them are. So that'll help.
Sure.
I just remembered one of the uses of triggers. Triggers lets you trigger another binding. So you can have a binding that gets triggered by a previous binding. So I remember people using that for a next song or next state, a thing that it did with media players to make them autoplay, so that you could have the end of the song send out a trigger that would then load in the next song on the playlist and start it. That's what triggers are capable of doing. So I think triggers is worthy of an entire webinar by itself. And
you can create very nice feedback in that way. If you trigger something which triggers itself.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so on, so.
And that's, in fact, that's part of the way some people have set it up, so that when you reach the end, it goes back to the beginning. It's through a type of a feedback loop. But and also feedback loopbacks. Loopbacks is a whole other topic that needs to be addressed. It has a lot of uses. It's normally hidden in the settings so that you can't make feedback loops by accident. not knowing what's going on. But that's a whole other topic. All right, so I'm going to add more webinars.
Thank you very much.
Do another 10, at least.
Right.
See you next time.
Okay. Take
See you
care.
then.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Bye.